You're listening to the Whole Church Podcast. Our efforts to educate and unite the church are made possible thanks to our sponsors on Patreon. Please consider joining them for $3 a month, where you can get a special 60% discount on our upcoming convention and hang out with us in person. We look forward to seeing you. 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 1 through 6 in the New American Standard Bible starts, "Now concerning food sacrificed to idols, we know that we all have knowledge. Knowledge makes one conceited, but love edifies people. If anyone thinks that he knows anything, he has not yet known as he ought to know. But if anyone loves God, he is known by him." It goes on to talk about whether or not you know if food was offered to idols or not before you consumed it. The end of the verse reads, "We exist for him in one Lord Jesus Christ, by whom are all things, and we exist through him." So here, St. Paul is writing to the church at Corinth about food offered to idols, but he makes some pretty bold statements that apply to the limits of knowledge and the power of love and relationship through God. Tripp, how do you think this teaching by St. Paul could better be applied in the church today as a whole?
Now for people that don't know, Joshua does so much prep for his podcast. He sends these in advance. So, and then the part you didn't read was the part I was most interested in, but it's the idol meat controversy in 1 Corinthians. But of the part you picked, I actually think one of the signs that you don't know anything is confidence that you know something. And it's not because there's not more knowledge to gain. I think it's that when talking about the divine, the ultimate mystery, the closer one is to participating in the divine life, the clearer one is about the unfathomable depths of the divine mystery. And I think that, I mean, you can see it in concepts like humility and all that kind of thing, but it's fascinating that is his setup, is an affirmation of the limits of knowledge, and to claim it is ultimately problematic for, at the end, unity in Christ. And then the issue he's dealing with there is idol meat. And it's kind of fascinating because certain people in the church and in different parts that Paul writes letters to, there's different kind of ethnic, cultural, religious situations taking place. And so one of the ongoing debates in kind of, especially the part of the early church that identified with Paul deeply, was, well, what do you do with particular parts of Torah that set expectations around who you eat with, what you eat, and all that kind of stuff? And then what do you do if the meat has been sacrificed to an idol? And Paul's like, well, technically, it's not like there are other gods, so it really wasn't sacrificed to an idol. But look, if the people know it's sacrificed to an idol and they get worked up about it, like, don't blow your biscuits, right? Like, This is not the time to go, nope, you're being ridiculous, friends. There absolutely are no idols. Watch me eat the idol meat. And then the other person's like, well, yeah, we know the true God, but they sacrificed it to an idol. We know that's unclean. Haven't you read Leviticus? You're breaking and you could just imagine this fight. And both of them have some version of, this is non-negotiable to me. And both of them have something in it that's right, that they're wanting to claim, like breaking your allegiance to the one that has redeemed you in Christ, or right, like at doing something and treating another reality as if it's real, an idol. And so both of them have these non-negotiables. So I think the text actually begs us to ask the question, like what is your non-negotiable? And then what kind of assumptions make those non-negotiables for you and your community of faith make sense? And can you imagine people who actually have been baptized into the same body with different assumptions, where their actual conclusion of this is different than yours, and yet though it's that you're being non-negotiable about it, that you can't actually think about the other's perspective and understanding and acknowledge that this kind of difference exists within the body of Christ. And so while Paul does have an answer to the idol meat question, he sidesteps it. I mean, he tells you what he thinks, but he sidesteps it to go to challenge the way different communities have drawn lines that they then break fellowship over, when each side is wrestling with the text out of their faith in understanding it in different ways and in different cultural contexts. And I think that there are, that situation is something that's alive today. And remembering that the beginning of knowledge is the recognition that you don't really know it all. And admitting you don't know and that the mystery's bigger than your finite mind can capture is not the slippery slide into relativism or, or being like driven by whatever the cultural mores is all the time and these kind of things. I think we are tempted to always label the other we disagree with as their convictions are driven by something sub-Christian and ours are pure. And I think Paul here is saying, yeah, I have an answer, but like, what do you really think that you have the final perspective? That's above your pay grade. And I've gone to those other places and I've also written them letters. And when you're there and you meet them, you realize these conclusions actually come out of their own experience in trying to be faithful. And if you have different beginning assumptions, and then you draw these lines about where you're non-negotiable, be it on idol meat or not, and these kind of things, you end up breaking fellowship where it's not necessary, because the mystery of the God whose love should be able to hold these in, as opposed to, chopping us up into warring tribes.
Yeah, it's what you said reminded me a lot of me and one of my best friends. DJ knows him too. I won't name drop for sake of privacy, but we started college.
Morgan Freeman.
Together. Yeah. Me and Morgan Freeman started college together around the same time. It was really fascinating to look at our lives then. And Morgan Freeman was going science, genetics eventually, and me going up in this conservative Pentecostal kind of era that we've talked about before. How certain we both were of what we wanted to learn going into college, of like how he knew genetics and all this, like new science, and this is what the science says kind of stuff. And I'm like, the Bible clearly says these things. And then we both kind of parallel tracks to where it's like you learn more, and there's a level of maturity of it, but it's also the more you know the Bible, the more you're like, oh, all these things that I thought the Bible definitely said might also say something different. It might kind of seem like there's a little bit of a push and pull there, and I think the same thing happened with him in science. And it's just kind of it's interesting that it's not just God, not just Bible. The more you know, just in general, I feel like the more you're like, oh, yeah, no, I'm not that certain. There is plenty out there that I won't agree with that's also valid. So,
I've always loved the quote. It's a misquote. It's paraphrasing at best, but it says, "All I know is that I know nothing." Socrates.
Yeah. It's a good
Huge
one.
fan.
Good one.
Socrates.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Whole Church Podcast. We've already had a great start to this one. Guys, I am one of your co-hosts, Joshua Knoll. I am here with the other co-host, the one, the only, the man whom podcast was created for. We weren't really sure if we wanted podcasts to exist or not, anything like that. Then TJ came along, we heard his voice, Tiberius Juan, and the Lord said, let there be podcast.
Yes.
Indeed.
Yes.
And we're also...
I definitely have a great, easy on the ears voice.
Yeah.
I've heard that my whole life.
Yeah. I'm just concerned when he's going to start ASMR. But we're also joined by one of the to me, podcast legends of our time. Someone, I love his show, love his work, his theology. Great guy to talk to. The one and only Tripp Fuller. Tripp, do you prefer Dr. Tripp Fuller or is it just Tripp?
No, as long as you let people know I have a PhD, so they hesitate 30 extra seconds before dismissing me as a heretic. That's great.
Okay, perfect.
I have a PhD in philosophical theology. Did a postdoc in religion and science at the University of Edinburgh, and also ordained Baptist minister. And
host of Homebrewed Christianity, beer theology beer camp.
That's where we met.
Yeah,
Will Rose, who was our matchmaker.
Yeah, perfect.
He's been on before. People know Will Rose.
Yeah, Will's cool.
PhD, Tripp, Therlonius, Zebulon, Fuller.
Yeah, that's absolutely accurate. Today, we're going to be talking some about his podcast, Homebrew Christianity. We're going to be talking some about can Christians drink or not, but mostly we're going to be sitting in your show. You've mentioned a couple different times the difference of Protestantism and evangelicalism. And that's something I'm really interested in because a lot of evangelicals, I grew up evangelical, just assume if you're Protestant, you are evangelical. So interested to get into that conversation of how you can be Protestant and not evangelical. What does that look like? And how do we have Christian unity with one another? So be a fun episode.
Yeah. And check out our convention's website. We have one now. It's in the description below. Use the code WHOLE for 40% off at checkout. You can get 60% off if you join our Patreon, but we'd love for you to be there. We're going to have a lot of cool activities. Shama Marema of VeggieTales fame, not the show, the song. Maybe you've heard it, maybe you haven't. You've probably heard the Chick-fil-A song, not Kanye West. Shama Marema will be there. Also, Eric Nevins, head of the Christian Podcasting Association. We're going to have a lot of cards, a lot of games, a lot of card games. A bunch of local food trucks are going to be there. Local to Charlotte, not local to where you are. Sorry. Maybe you can work that out. Pop culture discussions, things like that. We're nerds. If you've listened to Systematic Geekology, you probably know that. If you haven't, check it out. Also, you can join our questions and answers Discord channel, one of the bonus segments we do, if you join our Patreon. So I highly recommend it.
Yeah. It's a fun time over there too. We also, if half the time, if you ask us a question, we'll probably just message it to someone like Tripp. Like, hey, Tripp, someone asked us something you said. I don't know the answer, so.
Well, I'll see if I can get you to get extra questions sent.
Yeah. Just leave a lot of like really open-ended statements so that people join the Patreon to ask us questions about it.
Well, I mean, if you send me that list of questions, you get one sentence. I was like, I started looking at it, I was like, I'll just wait and see what the Holy Ghost says. Because
that's what I do.
Well, we know you do. People don't know that we can see videos while these are being recorded. And I don't know how Joshua podcasts with someone that actually has a halo over their headways podcasting.
We're just gonna stack on the TJ lore this episode.
Yeah. In the Discord, someone should ask. Someone should ask in the Discord, like, what was it that Joshua snuck in TJ's bunk when he was his camp counselor to get him into podcasting?
Yeah. We're going to make it so disappointing to meet me in real life.
Yeah. Well, for those who don't know, I'm not Catholic, so I didn't really believe in archangels and angels. They're just angels. And then I met TJ and I was like, oh yeah, no, archangel for sure. Yeah. So that being said, Tripp, I have a favorite form of unity that you may or may not be aware of. So it's something we like to do as a spiritual practice is silliness. And I like to ask a silly question to start the show off. Yeah. TJ and I'll answer first. Give you an extra second to think about it. In fact, TJ's going to answer very first. TJ, if you could put Kangaroo Jack in any other film just to see what he would do, which film would you add Kangaroo Jack to?
There are so many hilarious answers to this question.
That's, true.
Like,
how many of them get past your rating sensor?
I'm just gonna throw 5 out real quick.
You have 5 answers?
Yeah, but they're real quick. I'm not gonna go further on any of them.
He's prepared.
Kingdom of Heaven, The Polar Express, Hacksaw Ridge, Passion of the Christ, and Finding Nemo.
I think Passion of the Christ might just be the right answer. God, that's hilarious. I was gonna put him in. I've actually, weirdly enough, only seen this recently. Pulp Fiction. I think it'd be hilarious to have Kangaroo Jack in that. Also, I think he could blend in a little bit. He could. He is the right style, sort of. Be a funny time. All right, Tripp. What movie are you putting Kangaroo Jack in?
Well, I want Kangaroo Jack and a host of other animal characters to do the next installment of the Hangover series. So like it's starring Kangaroo Jack and alligator Loki. We get Lucky the pizza dog, Baby Groot. Yeah, see, what you do is you hook them all together, and then you say they're the actors. See, it's not them in the movies now; it's the animals that play them. And Kangaroo Jack is getting married to Kangaroo Sally, or Kangaroo Jill, obviously, because it's Jack and Jill. Yeah. And then they go to Las Vegas, and things get out of hand. But the only recurring human character is Mike Tyson, because you can't substitute like an animal for Mike Tyson.
I think a lot of kangaroos would be great substitutes for Mike Tyson.
But do you,
Those things are
but do
scary.
you want to? Because that was really peak Mike Tyson, and he is fresh off his tattoo. He hadn't got into the like marijuana business yet, and he hadn't like gotten jacked up again and then beat that kid up in the airplane that was harassing him. Like he was like the lovable Mike Tyson trying to put his life back together. And then now he's just like there chilling with Kangaroo Jack, Alligator Loki, Frog Thor, Buddy, the pizza dog. Come on. This is comedy gold. Comedy gold.
I feel like you just put PhD level, like developed your answer to this, like fully developed answer.
I don't know if the graduate degree helped.
Write a dissertation on the
but theater, being a theater and philosophy double major might have helped.
Oh yeah.
Where you're just like, commit to the bit. Let's see where this goes.
Yeah.
But honestly, like Kangaroo Jack is really like peak early odds animated animal character in a movie.
Yeah. I definitely watched your movie. That sounds great.
So one thing we found that really helps in gender unity in the church is to hear one another's stories. Would you mind sharing with us your testimony and how you came to where you are today?
Yeah. So I was a Baptist preacher's kid in the South. And when we, as a family, when I was going into 5th grade is when we moved to the big city of Raleigh for church planting. So my experience growing up in the church was rather positive. And my parents and the congregation eventually gets kicked out of most of the Baptist groups. But if you only go to the church your parents go to, then you kind of think like everyone in your tribe is like them because you're like, we're Baptist. And so I guess that's what the other ones were. And then I got to Campbell University for undergrad and realized that a lot of other Baptists weren't really down with the ability, like the spiritual giftedness of females. They had a deep commitment on a host of theological ideas I found rather off-putting, and had a kind of deep streak of anti-intellectualism and all that kind of stuff. I was in college during 9/11, and that was the religious response to it was, I would say, like that the second conversion experience in my life. The first big one came in middle school reading Cost of Discipleship for the first time and realizing like, this is serious. And because it was so serious, I was like, okay, I'm down. And then from then on, I was always reading theology and philosophy, like Kierkegaard and Paul Tillich and that kind of stuff in school. But then when I got to college and I was meeting a lot more of the church because I wasn't just, deeply involved in a congregation my parents were at, I realized that there were large portions of it that were not committed to the things I found compelling. Like my congregation where I was, it was like we were part of running the Baptist AIDS Partnership in North Carolina. So I grew up and knew lots of people with HIV AIDS and the diversity of people who ended up getting it at a time where the congregations generally shunned them when it was a death sentence. I went to my first protest and things with people from church. It's like, this is what you do. In North Carolina, we had the death penalty. So there was a popular first protest. And then after the invasion of Iraq, as I guess tangentially related theoretically to 9/11, and you have the biggest peace protest at that point in the globe. And our Defense Department, basically run by baptized Christians, thought, obviously, this is what makes sense. I was rather disillusioned. So coming back to my faith after that was when I realized that what passed as Christianity in at least the part of American culture I was in wasn't something I'd give my life to or was optimistic about it having a positive influence on the flourishing of the planet and my neighbors and enemies. But the story of Jesus and a community committed to the way of Jesus, I was more confident that it resonated deeply with not just the divine, but with a way of being in the world where you're committed to good news that matters to our biggest questions. And so I kind of backed in to being a minister then. I was kind of not wanting to be one, but you know how like you volunteer and then it turns out the people doing it leave, and then you're like, oh, I can do this. I grew up around it. I know what I'm doing. Like, and so that kind of happened. And I was a minister for 15 or so years. When we moved to California for my PhD, and my wife and I worked at the largest UCC church in Los Angeles, which is a mainline Protestant church. I'm sure we'll talk about more later, but you know, it's the UCC is one of the more progressive Protestant denominations. I was like the first to ordain women, LGBTQ people, advocated for like ecology and stuff like that in the 80s and things. The United Church of Christ is what it stands for. It's also Congregationalist, like Baptists are. So the seat of authority is at the congregational level.
Yeah.
So we when we had kids, our first kid, we were working at churches where we could exist, but we're kind of the edgy minority voice. And we realized we wanted our kid to grow up in a place where by osmosis, they picked up the values that we find in the ministry of Jesus. And that meant going to a congregation where we didn't argue about welcoming people, caring about justice, and seeking to live in community in a way that's positive for the world multiple generations out. So that was how we ended up going from starting as a Baptist preacher's kid to ending up, in kind of liberal Protestantism as clergy. And some in divinity school when I was at Wake Forest, started Homebrewed Christianity podcast almost 15 years ago now. So
wow,
that's always been a part of it. And at this point, like this past year that just finished, we had over 5 million downloads, and we do these online classes, theology classes. 17,000 people took one last year, and they're digging into philosophy, theology, Bibles, that kind of stuff. And I constantly meet people and hear from people who, because of building community on the internet and kind of giving the resources of the tradition that maybe aren't the most popular in the American church scene, find all sorts of people that still are still in love with the God they met in Christ, but don't have place in a lot of their communities. So the online has been a way of kind of figuring out how to be a minister and theologian in a different way. And it's also led to being the friend and listener of a whole bunch of ministers who don't know if they can say what they really believe or think to their congregations and still have health insurance for their family and that kind of stuff. So I feel like my experience and stuff has led to where I am now. And I'm trying to figure out, what does it mean to be faithful in this kind of weird internet sense? And, now after the first 40 years of my life being a preacher's kid and then clergy, figuring out what it's like to just be a congregant. I don't send emails after every sermon with my critiques. I've decided not to do that after getting hundreds of them.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, do you have follow-ups? I never know how detailed or what parts. I was just trying to think of the kind of things you wanted to talk about, and those were the...
Yeah. We hear a lot of those, or I've heard a lot of testimonies where 9/11 was a big catalyst in someone's, Christian journey. My dad might be sidetracking a little bit, but my dad says it's the second most eye-opening day of the year for him, of 2001, because Dale Earnhardt died in that February. Yeah, so that one was a little bit bigger for him. But yeah, major turning point.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing how different events like that happen. Oddly enough, I think I had almost the opposite experience to some of your college stuff. I ended up going to a public university, but I was studying religion and science when I first went. And it was really weird having grown up conservative Pentecostal. I think going to school and being like, wait a minute, that guy's a Christian and he just said a bad word. Christians can't say bad words. Like that was like, oh, I said as at 18. And then being at a school where the Catholic group was the one giving out free food. So who I was hanging out with?
Mhm.
People giving out free food. So, I ended up there, and then I ended up going to a Baptist college after that. So I've experienced all these different things in college. And then we started doing this podcast because it was like unity. And then once you start talking about unity, you open a whole huge can of worms where I'm like, wait a minute, there are people who believe what now? Like I had no idea. I hadn't even heard of process theology when we started this podcast.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
So what can you tell us about your own faith community currently and what makes it unique?
Oh, well, my family moved back to the States at the end of the summer. So we're new to the church. It's a Alliance of Baptist Church in Greensboro. But oddly enough, when I was in divinity school, I was campus minister at UNCG, and they have the same senior ministers back then. But the associate ministers are all new, one of whom was a friend of mine in undergrad. And then she also went to divinity school at Wake Forest University's Div School. And my sister-in-law and her family go there and have kids similar to our age, which is fun because, I'm not good at not being in charge in a church because I've always been the church planter's kid, which means you get there real early and set everything up in the movie theater, stay after and set it down. And then you learn to play every instrument to fill in for who's on the worship team. And then in college, I was like one of the leaders in BSU and led the worship team and was in a band and played at stuff. And then I was on staff at churches and all that kind of thing. So I like the interesting thing, I guess, at this point is, seeing just how I wish I'd spent a few years on the other side before I was a minister. I probably would have done a few things differently. But yeah, I'm enjoying like the idea of going on Christmas Eve and not being there for the other three services and just getting to like sing the songs and hear the story and light some candles and do Joy to the World and then actually go home and eat with your family was rather thrilling. I'm like, wow, this is amazing. And if you're a parent and you know that the church is going to make a loving and welcoming space for your kids and tell them the source of all existence cares about you, and you get an hour in a room with some adults where you are forced to apologize, the prayer of confession, and in the context of divine affirmation and possibility, you're like, well, I regularly get the shoulder, hit from Alicia. She's like, I'll take that, like the confession of sin. She's like, I've been waiting for you to say you're sorry. That'll work. It's just a real different, it's a real different experience, and I'm enjoying it. But because of all the stuff online, I guest preach and stuff pretty regularly. So, but in the local congregation, I'm enjoying it.
Nice. Yeah, it's the different communities that you encounter in some of the different churches and stuff. It's fascinating. I still love the community that I grew up in, the conservative Pentecostal church my parents go to. I love all those people. They're great people. But encountering different communities that I kind of feel like I fit in a little bit better when, I met Pastor Will, heard more about some of the Lutheran churches, kind of interacting more there and with some of the online community I met through you. And I'm like, yeah, these guys are a little bit more my speed, just as far as like, honestly, just as far as like having a conversation. Like I enjoy these conversations more than listening to someone talk personally. But you mentioned your show before. We talked about it a little bit. There is some controversy around beer and drinking, that kind of stuff. And some parts of the church, especially some of the people who listen to our show, was a little bit more conservative, grew up Baptist, Pentecostal, all that. Like, the church I attended growing up, I know some of them listen. And at the beginning, we read the verse, and you were talking about these non-negotiables that people hold on to, that we make a lot of assumptions about, and we draw a line. And I find it really interesting that you brought that up because of how it applies to this question of when people bring up, oh, you can't drink and be a Christian, the appearance of evil, the stumbling block for someone else, addiction, whatever else they bring up. How do you address that, knowing that for them, this is a non-negotiable line that you have crossed? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, well, I would just say like almost anything, don't be dumb. is an important rule. So, I have some people in my extended family who feel that way, and in their mind, they are pretty sure Satan lives in the bottle, right? So, I'm like, no, I mean, I guess like there, you could say like in the power of sin that corrupts people that are addicted and the harm and stuff that comes from it, but that's also true about mammon. I don't know. That was like literally an either or. You can love God or mammon. And I regularly get told, "Oh, you can't drink and be a Christian" by someone who's an ardent capitalist. So it's like I'm always like, that's interesting. But it also is just weird. Like what is actually in the text in Scripture is like plenty of people drinking, including Jesus, and so like it just requires you. Like if touching alcohol whatsoever is a problem, it just means you don't care what was actually written by the authors of Scripture, because Jesus made wine, first miracle in the Gospel of John, for people who drank so much they ran out. But see, it's not right, and that's what I'm saying. Like you can say that, it's just only people after they've moralized drinking as a source of the demonic in American evangelicalism ever thought that wasn't alcoholic. Like all the early church fathers, when they talk about it, it's definitely wine. Throughout the medieval period, definitely wine. The people that invented Protestantism, Martin Luther, the Anglican Church, like it always is. So it's, and it only exists right in America. So there's a fun historical reason why that is. But like I was speaking at I was the most progressive person in the room, gathering a very evangelical Germans. And they're like fundamentalist Baptists there. They all still drink. Mm-hmm. You know why? Because they weren't in America. But if you know the history of alcohol in America, it started to get abused by the poor working class in the late 18th and early 19th century. And the social gospel movement, which was the Baptist predominantly organized Christian socialist movement, where we got minimum wage, 40-hour work week, paid vacation, in child labor law, these kind of things as the result, like Walter Rauschenbusch, these people. One of the important parts of the social gospel movement was prohibition. And part of it was because people in factories were being worked to their body in pain, intense pain. And when you have been abused in the workspace and get home, what numbs the pain was alcohol. And then people that are bearing the burden of an exploitative economic system then numb their pain with alcohol and beat their kids and wives. And so part of the social gospel movement in American Christianity was the prohibition of alcohol and the demonizing of it. Now, if its experience was part of if that interpretation is connected to abuse of children and your family, then yeah, don't do it. But it's like, it's not like what's in the text. And the other thing I would just say, if you ask what happens in practice in most of these denominations, as someone who has spoken at almost every denomination in America's pastor gatherings at some point, there's, even if they're officially against it, I get emails before about how I'm going to go out with the half of the clergy that do drink. And they regularly don't drink in their town, or never other people are around. They all hide it and stuff. So it's just a weird thing to jump on, right? Jesus is like very clear on a few issues that we do not have non-negotiables over. And then each culture and tribe finds different ones. And so I think we're actually better off helping people think about healthy ways of practicing and engaging in all sorts of things. Like I found out after I got married at 20. So, I'm that everyone in my accountability partner and my accountability group lied. They actually all had premarital sex. I'm like, come on, years later, they're all like, I did. I'm like, we were in an accountability group. I got married at 20 and I saved myself, and so like in practice, people do all sorts of things. But if they think this voicing some ethical norm, it functions as like a master signifier for what my tribe is, and you'll be committed to the norm regardless of your your actual status. And I think drinking functions as that way for some people, which is actually why when my buddy Chad and I, when we started the podcast, we were in divinity school, and we found they had like translated and unearthed some of the beer recipes that Luther, his wife was the main person that brewed. Where they turned some monasteries into breweries, like some of the recipes, and we were going to brew them. And the whole idea of it was the evangelical industrial complex and how it functions for boundary maintenance will pick these different things. So when you use a beer metaphor, it actually gives people permission to know that they don't have to perform the expectations that are in that community. So let's say here's a good example. I was doing when I was in Los Angeles, I did live podcasts once a month at different breweries in LA. And, depending on the size of the brewery, there'll be like 60 to 100 people buy tickets and come. And, you went to beer camp. It's like a late night show with, so there's like music and communal singing, and it opens with basically a stand-up routine, theology talk, interview with some scholar, and all that kind of thing. But you buy a ticket, so it's technically not a church service. So all these people with religious baggage would come. And I was doing it one time, and I realized these 4 different guys all knew each other and were shocked that they got caught at the same gathering together. They all were friends. They all been coming. They were all ministers in the Evangelical Free Church. And it turns out they all listen to the podcast. They all connected. They all knew each other. Oh, how did you know each other? I knew a couple of them. Oh, yeah. We didn't know each other. Listen to the podcast. Well, what did that mean? They actually had co-ministers they work with on a regular basis in the same city. They had these same big questions. These 4 are ministers at churches over 2,000, one over 10,000. All 4 of them had changed their minds theologically about same-sex relations. And all of them are so scared to be honest with their congregation and how you would communicate it, how you'd bring people along. And they all thought the other ones still believed what the other ones thought they believed, and they would all get fired if they were found out. And then they're sitting at a brewery where they've thought, I'm allowed to have these questions and ask these questions and have these feelings and blah, 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 blah. And then there they are. And all of a sudden they had friends and allies where they could be honest again and then think about their task as ministers. And so one of the perks, I think, of what was a sideways metaphor, like, oh, well, let's have a podcast. And we named it that because we were trying to homebrew Luther's recipes. And then we found out it functioned this way culturally. And there's, stacks of stories where the using a metaphor of homebrewing and beer being associated with it gave people permission to acknowledge questions, doubts, thoughts, experiences that they knew you have to keep closeted if, you're performing whatever your boundary maintenance is for your particular religious tribe.
Yeah. Yeah. Mother Mary was the first wine mom.
Yeah. That's funny. I thought it was fascinating how many analogies C.S. Lewis used of mixed drinks. He was just like, this is casual. And I really find it, and I'm just going to drop this and let TJ take over, but the dissidence it takes of the arguments, the same people who argue against drinking, they do this of, oh, how can you be okay with evolution? All of these kind of theologies are so new. You're just attached to these new theologies and you doubt all the history of what we believed before then. And yet they kind of do what they're accusing people who believe of evolution. That's what they do concerning drinking, where they ignore the history of what the church has taught about drinking for thousands of years. Like, okay.
Yeah, and I mentioned the history just to know, like, the reason people grew up in communities where their faith involved we do not drink is because they're in the early industrial age in America, before workers' rights and such, you had men coming home after long days of pain, numbing themselves with alcohol and beating their kids and wife. Every Christian should be against that.
Absolutely.
And if that is the enabler, then it is demonic. It's not because there's special things in the chemicals. And what's funny, when I moved to California, in North Carolina, one time I mentioned as an example offhand in a children's sermon about cigarettes probably not being ideal. I got lectured after the church because they were like, cigarette money pays for everything here because what's around this church? Tobacco. I get to California, first youth trip I go on, right, with this church. We're camping. The parents who were with me brought a case of wine. And I thought they were tempting me to drink on a youth retreat after, all the tents are so you want something. I'm like, no, and I'm trying to figure this out. One of the same moms in that group sends me a message later when they see a picture of me and my dad and one of the other ministers smoking cigars. So my dad came to visit on Facebook. She's like, I'm real worried that you're using tobacco like that on your Facebook. It could encourage the kids. Same mom, 6 months later at their house for dinner. And her and her husband are like, we're finishing dinner and the kids are now running outside to go play. And she's like, do you want to smoke up? So, it's California. So like, she's like, never use alcohol. Never use tobacco. We take wine with us on the youth trips, but you do like weed, right? I was like, what? Anyway, so it is a different context altogether. I preached at a almost fundamentalist church in Humboldt, which is like one of the main pot growing areas in Northern California. Though the ministers and the worship team all smoking up outside before the worship service. No one thought anything. Why? Because the whole church works on pot money. Just like I couldn't make a reference about cigarettes at a church where half the families have tobacco farms. So because I'd been in those different places, same as like talking to almost fundamentalist Baptists in Germany, and then we're at a brew house, like unless you've gone in all those places, you may not understand what is culturally like what is parts of the culture, and then you need to honor it. And that's really Paul's advice, right? Mm-hmm. Like he's saying like, I know what my answer is. There's no idols. So the meat's perfectly fine. Like don't waste it. Like you don't have to, like, it's not that big a deal. Like, so, I'm speaking of this big Methodist thing in a few weeks and they're like, it's a dry campground. I'm not going to like sneak beer on stage and drink it. And the person running the camp's like, but don't worry, I'll take you out after. Like it's, anyway. So does that make sense? Like, I think the text is actually helpful because Paul, unlike most of the people in those congregations, travels around to different cultures and actually sees how things function. Right. And Corinth's big problem was they had too many rich people in their church. So the rich people got together, they ate and drank all day long. And by the time the working class showed up at church, they were drunk and had ate all the food. And he's like, you can't do this until the people actually have real jobs get there. That you can't call that celebrating the table of Christ when the ones that actually need the food get there. And y'all been going to Pound Town all day. Right. And he's like, and if you want to handle this, I need you to donate more money to the collection for the church in Jerusalem, from Peter, James, Jesus' brother and such, who are actually sending missionaries behind Paul to tell them that he didn't fully convert them because they need to get snipped and, to become full Jewish and a follower of Jesus. So Paul is, I think, a helpful one to think about it because he actually visited and helped plant all these communities, and they're in different contexts. So he's a different kind of perspective than when our kind of assumptions of what is normative are, yes, like scripture, the gospel and things, but also what part of history we're in, what race, class we're in, what part of the world we're in, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. All right. So one thing that we like to do to help our audience get to know our guest a little bit better is our speed round segment. We're just going to ask you a series of questions. The only rule is that you have to answer in a single sentence, and the only rule for us is that we cannot ask any follow-up questions. Do you think you're up for this?
I made it extra challenging for him too.
Okay.
You did. That's true.
Well, since you don't get follow-ups, and I feel like I'm trying to leave as many questions on your Discord as possible.
Perfect.
All right.
Yeah, all open-ended answers.
All right. You ready?
All right.
Who or what is God?
The three declarative sentences of Scripture, I affirm, semicolon, God is love, God is truth, and God is spirit.
What is salvation?
Salvation is the process by which God's intentions and dreams to the world are made material in the life of all of God's creation.
What is the significance of incarnation?
The incarnation is the decision for God to. The incarnation is the event that symbolizes God's refusal to be God without us.
What is the significance of baptism and the Eucharist?
Well, see, those are two different things. Shouldn't I get a sentence for baptism?
No.
Is the church's proclamation that before you could speak and before you had a name, God knew your face and cares, and that your most true identity is as the beloved of God. The Eucharist is the regular invitation to remember your own God-belovedness and be nourished by that love for the living out of that love in your life.
What authority does Scripture have?
What authority does it have? Scripture's authority is based on the faithful testimony of the people of Israel and the early church to the God who brought Israel out of slavery and raised Jesus from the dead.
What authority does tradition have?
Tradition is the community, tradition's authority is the community of those whose experience of God is mediated by Jesus. Let's see, how would I make that sense? Let's see. The tradition is a set of questions that those whose experience of God is mediated by Jesus have continued to ask. And as a tradition, it gives us both dignities and disasters that we inherit, revision, and pass on in love.
What are your views on destiny or predestination?
Destiny or well, I said earlier, God has refused to be God without us, and the God of love has refused to coerce us because love is required for genuine, or freedom is required for genuine love. So what is destined is the infinite God of love's faithfulness, but not a particular destination, because our cooperation in response to God cannot be determined and freedom be preserved.
Can God change?
Yes, that's because it says so in the Bible.
What do you love about the Bible?
My favorite parts of the Bible are the narratives and the Psalms.
How do we relate to God?
Moment to moment, each of us are met with the possibilities or the grace of God, and we get to respond consciously or unconsciously to the gift of the new moment to moment.
How many of the 7 sacraments do you or your church hold to, and which ones?
Well, the Free Church definitely focuses on the Protestant too. I mean, I know the Lutherans get the half-seas, but yeah, baptism and the Eucharist. But multiple of the others we just don't call them sacraments because Protestants were like, they're only a sacrament if Jesus instituted it. So, but I actually think it's smart. This is not one sentence. 2 is the answer, but I think it's smart to ritualize the intentions of all 7.
All right. Listen, I'm sure if a lot of our audience were placing bets, which they wouldn't because they would never gamble, they would have said you missed more.
Man, that was impressive. Some of those answers were excellent. Really impressive sentences. You just take those and just quote them. Might make a whole Instagram post. So, Tripp, you mentioned on your show, and I talked about it earlier, the difference of being evangelical and being Protestant. Could you just go ahead and unpack that? Just go wild.
Oh yeah, well, so if it's the one I think you were talking about, this is a conversation that Ryan Burge, who's a sociologist of religion, and I have kept picking up. And part of it is because, even the label evangelical means something in different places, right? In Germany, evangelical just means Protestant. There's Catholic faculty at a divinity school and the evangelical faculty. And in the evangelical faculty, you would have every part of the theological spectrum. It just means they're Protestant, and that's what evangelical means there. In America, the idea of saying Protestant really came about because one, the public square tends to make normative conservative white evangelicalism as the only kind of really expression of Christianity in or Protestant Christianity in America. And so but numerically, there's about as many mainline Protestants as there are evangelicals. And so it was like, how do you distinguish between the two? The desire to use the word Protestant in part is the word evangelical has switched from primarily being a religious identification to a political one, right? So if you do big studies, you'll have people of every other religion, Muslims, Jews, Hindus, Buddhists, identifying as evangelical Hindus, Buddhists, Muslims, Jews. And that's because they know the word evangelical right now has come to mean in the public square, basically like Trumpistan. And if you look at the surveying of those who identify as evangelical, the percentage chance they actually go to church has gone down dramatically. Now, has the number of people that identify as evangelical still identify as evangelical that went to church dropped? Not exactly. They aren't keeping their children as much, but like if you were a boomer and were an evangelical that went to church, you tend to still go. It's just now you have a lot of your friends who are also boomers and older who are, well, and we mean white evangelicals who use the label, who are evangelical now, even though they don't really go to church. They just know that this is part of the labels we use to identify ourselves. And, there was a time where the evangelical meant something explicitly theologically. But, if you took there's 3 or 4 big definitions of evangelicalism at the end of the 20th century, and you just went and who believed it, large portions of the black church would pass the evangelical theological test, and they would not have a non-negotiable at even, thinking, how could you even be an evangelical Christian and, vote for Barack Obama? How could you even do that? Well, what was the difference between the white church, where that has become more and more normative all the way to Donald Trump and company, versus a black church that still believes all the same theological things and is like, what? You're asking me how I could not vote for that guy? So over time in the data as to, and this is not a theological statement, it's just here's how our public square functions. Evangelical has turned into something that's primarily an political identity first, and then a religious one. And it is an identity, its political identity is only true for its, at least in a predominant way, with its with white Americans who are evangelical, because it's not the case for people of color that believe the same thing. So in hopes to go, that your political identity is so tied to your theological commitments, and they obviously make sense to break with it. The idea was to use the word Protestant. Like it used to use mainline Protestant when the dominant Protestant churches in America were like the United Methodist, United Church of Christ, the Episcopal Church, the Lutherans. These kind of denominations were the biggest until a large number of people left them because they took stands for integration of the schools, against Vietnam, support of the civil rights movement, these kind of things. When those which were the dominant religious groups in white religion in America took certain ethical stands, then those people that were like, no basket, I don't care what our leaders are saying about these issues. I'm more of an American, or I'm more of, a free marketeer than I am, listening to our ethicists. Then you get the emergence of evangelicalism, and then over time it became more and more of a political identity. And so, like, in lieu of going, oh, I'm Lutheran, or I'm Methodist, or I'm UCC, or I'm that other kind of Baptist that's mainline, or whatever, using the phrase Protestant, I think is helpful, because all of those churches, like, your Christian identity is centered, like Protestants always have, on wrestling with Scripture, the practice of baptism and the Eucharist, and fidelity to that wrestling and those practices is consistently in those denominations, something that doesn't, obligate you to the kind of, current expression of politics that dominates the religious right. And I think because when mainline Protestantism, think 1950, was peak, right? And you had its theologians on Time magazine and this kind of thing. Then the primary way you understood your religious identity was within a denomination. And you're a lot of them at that point, you're only 2 or 3 generations from being new Americans. So like if you go, there's lots of Lutherans in Minnesota. Why? Well, guess who moved there? There were a lot of Norwegians, right? So as you became more American, as we started to move more, and where you came from in the old world, in scare quotes, didn't determine so much about your particular denomination, where you lived, and that kind of thing. The differences between the two tend to really matter for clergy, right? Who have particular opinions about the Eucharist, or something we all fought about in the 17th century as versions of Protestants. But I think in the public square today, it's more helpful to use a marker that identifies a rather large portion of the country who have deep religious commitments, and it's not what is regularly recognized there. Does that make sense?
No, that makes perfect sense. And one of the more fascinating things to me over the last couple of years, Barna and a couple other church statistics groups did the studies, asked people questions, and found that the Black evangelical church is the one that knows the Bible the most, reads their Bible the most, preaches from the Bible the most, and yet they don't vote at all how we typically think of people voting when you say evangelical.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it was really interesting.
Yeah, and I don't think that actually means necessarily there. I think I'm right, obviously, but I don't think that means if you don't agree with me, you have to, the implicit bit of it isn't everyone that disagrees with me is really an ignoramus racist.
Yeah.
It's just you're friends with them. No, I'm just, I mean? But
yeah.
But I do think it's important for those of us who have deep commitments to the faith and they're regularly ignored in the public square to figure out how to articulate our collective. And because we were so tied to a time of thriving in the past where denominations function. The same as that was like when it helped to know what, like you went to every town and every Methodist church, whether you were in the country, kind of looked the same, sounded the same, and did the same thing, probably the same curriculum. Ministers all went to the same seminaries. Same kind of thing, like where you're like, oh, I love McDonald's. It tastes the same everywhere in the world. And it does, sadly. But, and that used to be like a huge asset. But now, your people, when they travel, aren't like, oh, I'm so glad this place has a Burger King. The people don't make decisions with a kind of brand or institution loyalty in the same way.
Yeah.
So when you go to other countries, you don't try like the unique McDonald's items, is what you're saying? The general gist of that statement?
I try to avoid McDonald's in every country. And then if I end up going, it's probably because it's across the street from the hotel and I drank too much and I like Egg McMuffins. Or a kid is like, Dad, I want a Happy Meal. And I'm like, they must have put ads on YouTube.
I love Happy Meals. So a lot of people have left the evangelical church because of church hurt or bad theology. We spend a lot of time addressing evangelicals and how they can reach out to those who have left the church. But I was wondering if you had any words of healing or wisdom for how those who have been hurt or left can still be in unity with the Christian community as a whole.
Yeah. Well, I would just say if I had that concern and was, thinking of, let's say you're a youth minister and former students have no interest in the community that you came from. One, I wouldn't necessarily take it personal because they could have, it may not have been about you. And I think a lot of parents, grandparents, leaders in church take someone leaving or going a different direction stuff personally as if it was a failure, but you don't know. And they're only where they are at that moment. Who knows where they'll be in the future. but so much of engagement, if your assumption is like they left because of something that's about me or something I think is, required for their, them to avoid eternal conscious torment or anything like that, then the way you relate to those individuals probably not going to be received great. And so I would ask, if you're going to talk to them about, I would ask questions and then listen to their experiences and let them know that you understand their experience and stuff like that. And I would do that multiple times before you decide to speak into it or tell them what you think. They probably left because they did a good job picking up what your community was communicating, or what it was not communicating about. Right. So the one element I would think is that unity requires recognition of the other in their difference. And oftentimes more communities that have anxiety around difference use unity as a justification for demanding sameness, be it in aesthetic, in practice, in beliefs, and this kind of thing. And just like the passage at the front, I think Paul is trying to generate a kind of unity in the church where there are different answers to these different questions. And he's collecting money from this congregation for another part of the church that doesn't think he's good enough, and that kind of thing. The other part I would say is that silence is also a form of communication. And when we're silent around things, which are often the reasons people say they leave, and some of them could be theological reasons, but often at this point in the current mass exodus, so much of it is the church's silence around ethical issues, that recognizing that silence does empower, and silence empowers the dominant assumptions of a tribe. And so like the four ministers who showed up at a podcast, they're all friends, but didn't know the other one even listened, or that the other one had changed their mind on LGBTQ issues. That group, a few months later, after that had an email exchange. One of the congregation's ministers had a teenager commit suicide after they came out to their parents, and the parents said what I assume they actually thought the minister believed about that. And then the minister is sharing the story, and he's like, I've spent the last 3 years trying to slowly open up this conversation. And I know I've never said anything that supported divine sanction around homophobia. Like, he's like, if whether or not you believe with him, he's being intentional, right, about trying to slowly do this and that. Well, because of the context, his silence, even though he never personally said it, but they know what tribe he's in, an evangelical free church, and that kind of thing. The silence empowered certain assumptions on that teenager, and the parents performed what was to their child, and they committed suicide. Now, obviously, no one supports suicide, but I'm just saying, think about how silence does that. And oftentimes, there are people who I meet via the internet who have assumed all sorts of things about their parents, faith leaders, communities of faith, because in their tribe, say evangelicals or something, this issue's thorny. So even if they're edgy, they're silent about it, or they nuance and are vague or whatever. And then the inertia of the tribe takes over. The other thing that's happened around silence of late, in a lot of these online groups, I have discussions with a lot of the ministers. In lockdown, so many people spent time on the internet. Now, you may have gone to your Zoom church for an hour each week, but if you are not a worker or homeschooling your kid, what do you think those people with college kids or kids that have left the house did? They played on the internet, and they got their anxieties and fears ramped up, and which is a wonderful marketing tool, for social media. But what is a YouTube sermon and worship service going to do with someone that now just spent 15, 16 hours scrolling, trying to work up their attention by telling them, here's what our tribe believes. Oh, you're in this tribe. Now we know. Here's the thing you should be fearful of. Actually, what is the craziest version of what you just clicked on? We can give you next, right? And it goes over and over. And then this minister could have been silent on these things or trying to nuance it and stuff. But then you can't counter program if people experiences you as part of a tribe when the algorithm takes hold. And I know so many ministers that have quit or are trying to quit because they got done and they get back together in person and they realize the community that they were ministering to after the algorithm that amps up anxiety and fear got through with them post-COVID is not the same place. And they couldn't tell the truth, and they refused to lead a place where these certain convictions they don't have are now being demanded from the congregation. One of the big shifts in the 2000s, if you track surveys of clergy, is it used to be in the 90s, the organization within evangelicalism around political stuff was clergy led. And then they are figuring out how to organize and leverage faith communities for political action. After Barack Obama, the shift had switched. Now you're more likely to have a congregation that is politically more polarized and on the margin politically than their clergy. And this is not just true in evangelical circles. It, like, depending on your Catholic parish, or is it a Jesuit or not? The congregations will get further left or further right, and political identity at this point is now downstream or upstream of religious identity, and it hasn't been that way for a lot of American history. Mm-hmm. So you end up where this silence and the scaredness of leaders to go like, my kid, if you're getting all these emails from your half your deacon board saying, you are working with part of the conspiracy to make us wear masks at church, all this kind of stuff. You're scared. You don't want to lose your job and all this kind of thing. So what do you do with that? Like, you have to figure out a nuance. You stay silent. So recognizing the challenge of unity in I really think we have to take seriously how unity should not be a demand for sameness, and silence can be just as powerful at forming our congregation as what we say explicitly. And it's, sorry, that was rambly.
Oh, no. No, I agree. That's why when I go buy Hogwarts Legacy at GameStop, I'm going to very loudly and verbally say I do not support hate speech. Mm-hmm.
So true.
I feel like I might actually have to these days.
So true. That's why I'm going to buy it online.
That's a better idea. I might do that.
And if you're listening, I'm not going to buy it.
I'll leave an Amazon comment that says I don't support hate speech while I buy the game.
Yeah, I'm going to pirate it, actually. But I have not missed mask discourse. I had a lady one time ask why I'm wearing my mask at work, and she was like, "They can't force you to wear that." And I was like, I just don't like the way my front teeth look, lady. Now it's convenient.
Yeah. Sometimes I still wear it into work now that it's winter. Keeps my face warmer,
Yeah, I wear it when I put up the truck. It's cold in a walk-in cooler. Yeah. Anyway, another constituent of our people who follow our show are those who follow more in the conservative Baptist Pentecostal camp. What would be the most important thing you think you could say to that portion of our audience?
Well, two things. One, I would just say when you're talking about other Christians, that the church is a lot bigger than your particular tribe. So don't bear false testimony against us. I get these messages quite often. Unsolicited 3-page life advice from Baptist minister who's like, some kid that went to that church is now in college and then sent them an episode. And I'm always like, are you sure? So not bearing false witness is really a good idea. And like trying to understand before you, speak on behalf of someone. But the other thing I would say is it's also helpful to be honest about your community. I regularly get messages from people who got involved in a congregation and such, and it's not till they want to be volunteer or be in leadership or something that they find out the church actually has commitments around certain parts of inclusion. Like, we don't actually let women teach Bible studies, or you can't be a member and be gay, or this kind of stuff. Being honest about your community is actually the kind of pain people have when they realize they just spent a year and a half and falling in love with a community, and then that the leadership is being vague, but then they're ultimately going to be rejected, does not actually help your long-term. If, like, let's assume you really just want them to be just like you. You're not going to get there by like luring them in and then telling them, actually, this whole time, I know we never told you. It's important to us that you can't do any of these things.
Yeah.
And I mean, you could think of other things, but being honest is very helpful. And the same is true. I mean, when I was minister at churches that were very welcoming and affirming, is trying to make sure that's clear so people don't come for the view, enjoy it, and then they come to join the church and they're like, you do what? You know? So I just think that a lot of the way the seeker sensitive and scare quotes things from the 90s and such is playing out now leads to people being culturally ambiguous, and people then don't find out until they've actually, developed relationships.
Yeah. That's actually a problem that we kind of have, because doing a Church Unity podcast, it actually helps to be vague a lot of the times. But then I get all these like texts to different things of, why would you let someone so conservative on? And then it's the next week it'll be, why is someone so liberal on? And I say that I'm mostly conservative evangelical, and I kind of show where sometimes I'm not, sometimes I am, but the purpose of this show is actually to know what you guys believe and think. So it's kind of, it's interesting the responses we get because we're a little bit more vague, and we'll invite anyone in the church. This is the whole church podcast,
Yeah.
I say nothing personally.
So does people like message you to see what you believe and you just don't respond? Okay. So that'd be really funny.
Never.
Yeah.
I've not gotten a single one.
That is nice. Yeah. I feel like if I did less talking, I would get less of those messages.
Probably.
Yeah. It probably makes sense. I should probably stop.
Not right now, though. It's your turn.
Fine. Okay, so one thing we like to ask everybody, Tripp, is if you had to give a single tangible action, just something really practical, our listeners could stop this show and just go do it, that would help better maintain unity in the church today, what would it be?
Spend less time on social media and go hang out with people.
Yeah. Stop listening to podcasts, you weirdo.
Listen to podcasts.
Those are a lot better than scrolling.
Oh, okay, yeah. Listen to podcasts on your way to go hang out with people.
Yeah.
You got a car.
So what would be the ramifications if everyone listening did just that?
Well, they would find out that humans are complicated and messy, and and those are the very complicated and messy things that bear the image of God and are worth caring for.
A little nuance.
Nice.
Very nuanced species here.
Mm-hmm.
So, before I wrap up, we just ask everyone to share a moment that they saw God in recently, whether that be a blessing, challenge, moment of worship, anything. So, we'll go first. You seem ready.
Yeah.
But I always make Josh go first. So, Josh, do you have a God moment for us this week?
Yeah, mine's pretty quick and easy. I was afraid we were going to not have Disney for a little bit. My debit card, I had to get a new card. I was like, how am I going to pay for this? I don't want to go Christmas week without it. I got to watch Christmas movies. Good friend DJ just paid the Disney Plus for the month. So that was pretty cool. Good of him. Yeah. Love that guy. If he's listening, shout out DJ.
I promise he's not.
Yeah, fair enough.
So for me, my God moment might be a challenge. Our other kitchen manager, I assume if any Chipotle employees are listening, you'll understand every word of this, and everyone else, I'm sorry. Our other kitchen manager quit, and there are only 2 other managers really right now. So I'm going to be working a lot more.
He was already working too much.
Yeah. So
may God give you strength.
Philippians 4:13, right? That's in context. That applies.
Oh man.
Oh, Tripp, do you have a God moment for us?
Well, I was in a very days of consecutive emotional intensities, and woke up, and clearly my face and emotion were revelatory. And my daughter saw me. She was on the couch when I came walking in, and she goes, "Dad, And then she runs up and gives me a big hug. And one of the things we say, and we have our Fuller family truths. She puts her arms around me, starts hugging me. She goes, remember, Dad, the most true thing about you is you're God's beloved. And it's like, hugging
That's
me.
awesome.
Like, oh, thank you, Cora.
That's fantastic.
Quick question. Your daughter's name?
Oh,
Yeah, Cora.
As in the Avatar?
No.
Okay.
It's much nerdier. Cora, like from Plato's Timaeus dialogue.
That is nerdier,
that's wonderful.
Yes.
but also cooler.
Well, you know.
Korra's like the worst Avatar we know. Anyway, if you enjoyed the show, please consider sharing it. Actually, don't consider it. Do it. If you, I'm no longer asking.
Just share it.
If you listened this far, you might as well share the podcast with a friend or an enemy, a cousin.
Yeah, preferably a cousin.
If you don't have cousins, share it with one of mine. They don't listen. Some of them don't. Check out the convention website. A lot of cool stuff going on over there. Go ahead. I think you can buy a ticket already.
Yes.
Yes, you can buy a ticket already. Food trucks, free merch, multicultural worship services. Very, very cool stuff going on. Lots of different denominations, and it'll be pretty awesome.
Yeah. If you want to hear our other show, make sure you go over to systematicgeekology.org, hit the host tab. My name and TJ's name is over there. You can see all the episodes we're a part of, and maybe TJ will talk about why Korra is the worst Avatar at some point. Who knows?
It should be evident.
Yeah.
Hope you enjoyed the show. Come back next week when we will interview the author of Open and Relation Theology and God Can't, Thomas J. Ord. Then we will be speaking with Andrew Fouts, host of the Ministry Misfits podcast. After that, we will be speaking with Dr. Jennifer Bashal, author of Scapegoats, the Gospel Through the Eyes of the Victims. Finally, at the end of season 1, we will be speaking with Francis Chan.
Yeah, he doesn't know that, though. He'll figure it out, I assume. Email us when you do.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Let us know. We can work something out. We're pretty booked up. We're pretty big. We'll
Last
make
I
time
heard
for
was
you,
July 6th he's going to be on, right? That's all I know.
I think maybe July 13th.
Oh, okay. Well, whenever he decides, really. I mean, honestly, we're not that picky.
No, we're not. Thanks for listening. Thank you for your time. Dr. Tripp, Theolonus, Zebulon. Thank you for listening to the Whole Church Podcast. Tune back in next week. We'll be interviewing Thomas J. Ord, the author of God Can't and Open and Relational Theology. And remember, you can always sponsor our show on Patreon for $3 a month and get a 60% discount on our upcoming convention to come hang out with us. We look forward to seeing you.